important. There were more gurgling and grumbling noises coming from the creature as it reached one of its many tentacles over to pick up a large display tablet. Using the suction cups on its appendage like fingers, the octopus quickly brought up the message and began reading. However, it wasn't long before they started to make a new set of noises, though these were far more erratic. The four massive eyes surrounding the head of the being grew even wider, as Sarah's translator simplified the noises to frantic sounds of realization. "All right," Sarah interjected before anyone could get too distracted. "I need a drink, and for one of you to explain to me what's this about tens, and why you and that bouncer are looking at me like that." "Well, what'll y'all have then?" the Tsar asked, without even realizing that he had no knowledge of Earth intoxicants, and Sarah wouldn't be able to read the menu written in galactic common. "Give me a heather ale and a scotch, if you got." Sarah replied, as a test to see what the alien would give her. Realizing his mistake, Tsar shifted one of his eyes towards Mia to look for help. Luckily for him, the Quiztar already had her tablet out and was searching for the information. "Aha! Mia chimed in, as she moved to face the screen of her tablet towards the bartender. "This is the heather ale." Taking the tablet into one of his tentacles for a moment, and bringing it closer to one of his eyes, it took Tsar a moment before reacting. "Ah, Keniseris, Odal, a woman of refined taste." Tsar responded with a hint of excitement in his voice while returning the tablet to the Quiztar and grabbing a mug off a rack. "We obviously don't have anything from your homeworld in stock." However, the translated voice had a coy tone to it. "I do have a particular floral brew with much the same chemical composition. Private reserve for when Admiral Axika graces us with her presence." While he spoke, the tentacle that had grabbed the mug was soon accompanied by a second, which opened a well-hidden drawer built into the inside of the bar counter. A third tentacle stuck its way into a small tap handle as the first brought the mug under a spout. That ability of the tentacles to delicately angle the mug as the amber liquid poured forth showed this being was well skilled at his craft. The perfectly formed head created a clean, flat surface level at the top of the mug. "Oh, I can't take from the Admiral's personal reserve. That would be rude," Sarah weakly protested after she could see that the beer was already poured. Tsar simply scoffed in his water-filled voice and made a sound as if he was going to make his own comment before Mia Korva interrupted him. Oh. The sounds were incredibly similar to the ones a human would use in that context. "Scotch whiskey." It was clear from the tone of her voice that she was reading something that surprised her. Sarah, however, was far too interested in the near-picturesque pint that had been placed in front of her to notice Mia's expression as she took the frosty mug in both hands and brought it up toward her face. It smelled heaven. The sweet, malty aroma was close enough to an earth brew that she almost felt like she was in a bar in Glasgow. As she brought the mug up to her lips and let the drink gently flow into her mouth, she closed her eyes and just pretended for a second that she was back home. Though the beer was a bit less malty than she was used to, the rest of the sweet, floral, citrus, and herbal flavors all blended together into a perfect harmony. It wasn't quite fresh, but Sarah loved it nonetheless. There was only one thing missing from it. "So, about that scotch?" Sarah asked, with a faint foam mustache sitting on her upper lip. "About that," Mia replied with an almost concerned tone while she handed her tablet to the barkeep. Oh, yeah. No, the octopus replied, with mocking laughter almost immediately after looking at the tablet. What? You? Why? Oh. Sarah's tone and expression had grown suddenly very defensive. This says 40% to 99.5% alcohol by volume. The octopus tried to explain. And the last time we gave a nishnab anything over 20%, we had to change the name of the bar. Nish. You mean tens? Sarah was still defensive, but now much more curious. Look, I don't mean to make any assumptions, but I don't think the Native American group he's from really drank alcohol. I'm Scottish. We've been drinking different alcohols for thousands of years. The historical section did suggest that Scotch has been consumed by the Scottish people for at least several hundred years. Mia Corva wasn't sure if she should be on the human side or the barkeepers. Yeah, and it's normally only around 40%. Sarah added, to try to convince the bartender. Mick's crazy enough to drink moonshine, but I won't touch that shite. Only if you promise not to immediately jump out the window. Czar finally conceded, while pulling a bottle with dark liquid with one tentacle and a shot glass with another. Again. What? Sarah's defensive tone was now completely replaced by a need to know. Are you trying to tell me that Tens got drunk and jumped out a window? Sarah leaned slightly in the stool she had sat in to look down through the nearby window. This bar used to be called the Top of the Bottom because it was at the top floor of the habitation ring, which means that it's at the bottom of the structure. The octopus explained, while using one of its tentacles to mimic the shape of the ring structure and another to show the counterintuitive location of the bar. But then, about 10 years ago now, Tens got invited here to celebrate taking down a Bendari pirate fleet. See that window right there? Mia interrupted to point out a window at the corner of the room. That's an access point that can be opened by maintenance or security personnel. Tens was and is considered to be security personnel. And someone thought it was a good idea to mention to him that the gravity panels in this section have a safety system that makes it so nothing will fall faster than 10 meters per second. The way the strange aquatic sounds translated into Sarah's ear implied that the being was still in shock at Tens's actions from a decade earlier. That guy got stumbling drunk, opened the window when no one was paying attention, asked if anyone wanted to go diving with him, and then just jumped. Do not tell Mick that story. Sarah couldn't control the impulse to give that warning. She picked up the shot glass she had been given and continued. He'll either take it as a personal challenge or try to turn it into a sport. Taking the shot, while only grimacing slightly, Sarah concluded, but where the hell would Tens even get the idea to jump like that? He seems way too reasonable for that. I think that's just how he is as a person. Mia replied in a seemingly exasperated tone. His primary specialty is orbital insertion in a mechanized walker. I'll being it to all. You have orbital drop mechs? Sarah blurted out the question. Whatever you do, don't let Mick know about those. The Gardens of Deathworlders, Part 10. So, this is what y'all wanted to show me? Sarah asked in a somewhat incredulous tone. Some alien space mech. It's not just some alien space mech, Mick retorted while shooting the obviously unimpressed woman a glare. It's my alien space mech. There was a moment of silence as Sarah processed what had just been said. Her concerns about Mick finding out about this kind of technology was nothing personal, and if she was being honest with herself, she wanted one too. However, the more alien weapon systems introduced to the Sol system, the worse the arms race between Un-E and Marskov could get. Every time a new weapon system is introduced to end all wars, it simply inspires the next. How the fucking hell is this yours? The ginger's voice was a mixture of confusion and anger, with a hint of despondence. I bought it. Is style. Mick responded in a matter-of-fact way. You let him buy this. Sarah had turned her attention towards Miakorva, who was standing off a few paces away, next to Tarky. Tense and Binko had already wandered away from the others to join the Kaim-Ayak engineers, inspecting the 5-meter tall mechanized combat walker suit and weapon systems on display. Though both were far more familiar with mech suits meant for orbital drops than most, this particular model and its weapon systems seemed fairly unique. The basic chassis and frame of the system were the same Model 10's personally preferred, but every component was of the highest possible quality the Hammer could manufacture. Rather than a cost-efficiency piece of practical hardware, this was a showcase of what was theoretically possible. I had no say in this whatsoever. Miakorva's normally quite relaxed and professional posture had become somewhat defensive. As neutral diplomatic officers, Tarky tried to interject in the most pleasant and human-like tone she could muster. We aren't really supposed to tell people what they can or cannot do. And we also weren't informed until Mick and Tens were already trying to negotiate pricing and development costs with the Kaim-Ayak. How much does something like this even cost? Sarah half shouted in frustration. Even though it had only been a few days since that initial meeting, she had already forgotten about the bounty reward that Mick had received. Just the suit or the full suite and support systems. An adorable set of high-pitched squeaking noises called back to Sarah from a beaver-like creature standing on the scaffolding at one side of the suit. Seeing as he didn't immediately hear a response, the Kaim-Ayak simply answered both 50 million credits for the suit and another 25 million for everything else. You spent 75 million credits. That came out as a shout, even if Sarah hadn't intended it that way. What does that even convert to? No, I'm spending 900 million on 12 of them, Mick said with a completely straight face. But I have absolutely no idea what that is in bits or euro dollars. I think it might actually be fairly similar, though. Well, what do you base your currency off of? Mia asked the pair of humans in an attempt to change the subject. The immediate reactions on both of the humans' faces was not what she was expecting, though. Ha! Oh. Mick let out with a laugh, while Sarah almost looked embarrassed. Nothing. Nothing at all. The value of our money based on the demand for the money, and how much we all just sort of believe it's worth. That's a joke, right? Tarky asked, while looking back and forth between the humans. Nah, he's more or less right. There's more to it than that. But Sarah always regretted being involved in discussion about monetary policy with Mick. There are controls and the governments regulate it. But none of our currencies are really based on anything physical anymore. All right, students, Mick had suddenly taken up the tone of a professor about to start a class. Who's ready for a lesson in monetary policy? No. Both Sarah and Mia shouted in unison. Sarah had already heard this rant several times before, and Mia was getting flashbacks of her time in the academy. I'm sorry. Tarky tried to interject to supersede the other women. But I don't really understand how a monetary system can function without a stabilized good or resource acting as the basis for the currency. It functions because we believe it functions, Mick said in almost sarcastic tone, which triggered confused expressions from the Croak and Quiztar. Without going into a 300-level university lecture, it just works because we believe it works, and our money has value because we believe it has value. The two confused non-humans looked over towards Sarah for reassurance. However, Sarah simply shrugged and nodded her head in agreement. Your money sounds stupid, Tens shouted from across the room. There's a reason we used to call it mindem. Mick's reply was followed by sharp cackling from both Tens and Binko, both recognizing the context of the word, even without their translators. The term translated to the action of grasping, something given to you which can and will be taken away eventually. Well, if it's so stupid, how does your money work, huh? Sarah retorted in a snarky tone. We don't really use money all that much within our society. Tense slowly responded, while walking back to the group to avoid shouting. We have so much automation and such a resource and energy abundance that people just have access to whatever they need to live a happy and fulfilling life. Sounds like communism, Sarah joked, while elbowing Mick's organic arm. That word, however, prompted Tenz's translator to inform him that he would need to read the relevant summaries to properly understand the context. It sounds vaguely similar, Mick interjected, while Tenz was pulling out his lens piece to look up the information. But communism is a Western concept from the 1800s. Anishinaabe wouldn't really have had contact with Europeans, and they were abducted way before then. Yeah? Ten spoke up. I'm not gonna lie. This seems like a really convoluted way to explain this. The information being displayed on the HUD of his lens seemed overly wordy to him. Everyone pitches in because everyone takes. If you want more, you pitch more. There's always something to do, even if it isn't really necessary or essential. I don't see why anyone would need to write a whole novel to explain that. Shit. That sounds nice, Mick commented before Sarah could muster a response. But how do you buy stuff then? Sarah was still trying to wrap her head around what was being explained. Like, how would you buy something like that for yourself? She asked while motioning towards the mech. I mean, we do have money, Tense replied, almost offended. We just use the galactic energy credits as our currency. And I wouldn't buy something like this. I could buy a luxury shuttle with a subspace drive for that much. But how would you accumulate the wealth to buy it? Sarah showed hints of exasperation in her continued questioning. Like, if there isn't really a need to work, then how pays you to work? Oh, God, Tense shouted. Nee. The way his eyes were moving behind the lens he wore indicated he was reading something on the screen. Means of production of wealth. Now that makes sense. Sorry, I just caught up to the explanation of what this writer was talking about. But I think that kind of explains the confusion. Go on, Mick said with a coy expression on his face. I guess you could say we're kind of close to this in some ways. Tense explained,